Working for the Grateful Dead was a large amount of laughs. They were very funny people. And in the previous 2 years that I've come and talked to you, I've mostly, frankly, went for the cheap laughs. It's my usual style, because they're so easy. But this is, after all, the third time I've spoken with you, and I've given you all my best stuff as far as laughs go. So I wanted to try something different tonight. I want to talk about your history, my history, our history as Deadheads. And before, because I know that a number of you have a button in your head that says, I hated history in high school. And before you reach for that button, let me remind you that this is not Alexander Hamilton, 1812. This is your history as Deadheads. Because I'm sitting here in front of you, and I worked for the Grateful Dead because Jerry Garcia had an extremely profound sense of American history and of the Bohemian tradition in American history, the weirdness history, the weirdness tradition that he was very much a part of, partly just being a San Franciscan, but other things as well. And that's why I'm here. So, you know, when Jerry was 16 years old, he took art classes at the San Francisco, what is now the San Francisco Art Institute. And his teacher was a man named Wally Hedrick. And one day, one of Jerry's buddies, who was in the art class, said, okay, it's 2017, so let me invoke a magic time machine. Let's go back 60 years. And it's 1958, 59 years. It's 1958, and Jerry is 16, and he lives on the south side of the city, and he's going to the coolest place he knows. And he was so proud to be. It's the only school he ever admitted he went to. And he's at the Art Institute with Wally Hedrick, and one of his pals says, what's this beat thing everybody's talking about? It's 1958. Jack Kerouac's book, On the Road, is a bestseller. It's on the lists. And Wally said, you're beat. We're all beat. Wally was certainly part of the beat scene. He said, go down to City Lights bookstore and get this book, On the Road, and you'll understand what's happening to you. It is one of my sincerest regrets that I never asked Jerry whether he bought the book or more likely shoplifted it. I'm pretty sure the latter. Who had the money? But Jerry definitely went to City Lights, and he got this book, and it changed his life. And from that day until the day he died, Jack Kerouac was one of his fundamental, I was going to say heroes, and that's true too, but it was way beyond heroes. He described it to me as one of his ethical teachers, as one of the people who taught him how he was going to live his life. And that was, a sociologist would say, in the Bohemian tradition, which is to say, to live his life in which matters of the spirit and of ethics and of caring about the planet were more important than making lots of money. Now, Wally had a lot of effect on Jerry Garcia. For starters, he played this blues musician, actually a fairly commercial blues musician from the 30s by the name of Big Bill Brunzi while the students were painting. And it was that hearing that guitar that made Jerry, when he was 15, say, well, what happened was when he was 15, he got an accordion for his birthday. And the way 15-year-olds are, he said, no, I want a guitar. And eventually they swapped it for a Dan Electric guitar, and frankly, from then until the day he died, he had a guitar in his hands. So Wally had a profound effect on a number of levels. And Wally was a beat. He was a guy who followed the beat poets, Allen Ginsberg and Lawrence Ferlinghetti and all those guys, and he was part of that scene. And they said that living life based on art and the spirit was a lot more interesting and a lot more important and a lot more righteous than buying a mortgage, having 2.3 children, and living the conventional life that America in the 1950s called for. Now, I published this book about Jack Kerouac in 1979, and in the process, I'd become a deadhead, and I wanted to write a book about the Grateful Dead, and I didn't have a friggin' clue how to get a hold of the Grateful Dead, but I instinctively knew that if I marched up to them and said, hi, I'd like to write a book about you, I'd get a note saying, thanks, take a number. So I waited, and I sent a copy of my book to Jerry through the Grateful Dead fan club mailbox. And because Eileen Law is a saint, she took that book and put it in his mailbox, and he did get it, and he did read it, and eventually, very long story short, I met him. And he got very excited. I did a good job. I'm not trying to be modest, but he got excited because Kerouac was really his hero. And the idea that I had written this book about his hero and that he liked it really mattered a lot to him. Look, we talk a lot in America about freedom, and there's, real broadly, there's two kinds of freedom in this country. There's the freedom that Henry David Thoreau demonstrated in the 1840s at Walden, in which he completely challenged almost every one of the fundamental concepts of what it is to be an American. To be an American is to be Christian. Maybe not. To believe in the what they call the Protestant work ethic. You know, that life is about working real hard and making lots of money and, you know, benefiting your family and denying yourself and, you know, etc. And that life is about treating nature as something to be raped, something to, you know, make money out of. And Henry David Thoreau back in the 1850s said, fuck all that. And as a matter of fact, most of what he said was so outrageous in his time and place that nobody paid the fucking bit of attention to it until the 1960s. Because the other kind of freedom in this country that has always been is the freedom to make as much money as frigging possible, which produced our current president. Okay? He believes that. That's America, right? I will never, ever forget him in one of those stupid fucking Republican pretenses of a debate in which somebody said something snotty to him and he said, you can't talk like that to me. I'm a billionaire. So right now, we live in a time in which the person theoretically in charge genuinely believes column A, freedom is to make a lot of money. Now, as it happens, I might add that Jerry Garcia is from column B. I've spent the last year curating a photo show for the California Historical Society about the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love, which traces basically the change from the Beats to the hippies, from Kerouac to Jerry. Actually, Jerry was never really a hippie. He was kind of a baby beatnik. He thought of himself as the youngest beatnik. But he stayed around and he changed and he dragged us all along with him. And if, by the way, you get a chance to come to San Francisco before September 23rd, which is to say you got a month, it's at the California Historical Society, and it's 678 Mission Street near 3rd, and I think it's pretty cool, and I invite you. But because of this project, I've been thinking about what happened between, say, 1955, when Allen Ginsberg first read Howl and sort of brought the Beat generation to the public eye and ear, and, say, the Monterey Pop Festival, when, and Rosie was talking about poor Phil standing on the side of the stage after the Who destroyed their instruments at the Monterey Pop Festival, going, we have to follow that. And what the poor bastard didn't know is, and then they'd play, and then Jimi Hendrix would torch his guitar, and nobody would ever remember the Grateful Dead from that day. That's Grateful Dead karma, you know. The big ones were always a little, So this photo show traces what happened between Howl and the end of the beat of the hippie scene in the Haight-Ashbury, which has there's a number of things you can point to, but at least one of them is when the Grateful Dead got busted at 710 Ashbury Street. And there's a wonderful picture in my photo show from the San Francisco Chronicle of Bob Weir being led down, and she didn't mention this, and Rosie, handcuffed to him, being led down the front steps of 710. Of course, Bobby's going, because he's as anti-authoritarian as you can get, and by God, if he's going to have a special moment, he's going to take a bow. And he did. And of course, all of that shit went away because it was bullshit, and we all know it. Somebody throw me a joint. It's legal here, right? So I sent Jerry no, it wasn't literal, but I'll get to it in a minute. Okay, but I know where it is. So, oh yeah, not very long later. So I sent Jerry this Kerouac biography, and I eventually met him, and he got very excited about it. And as I say, I'm not trying to be modest about it. I think I did a decent job, but he was excited because of how important Kerouac was to him as a young man, as a 16-year-old trying to figure out. He was sort of naturally cynical, skeptical. And Kerouac popped up and said, listen, this is what's important. And it's not what you've been taught. It's all the other stuff. Then he found acid, and he really found out, but that's another story. So it's really dangerous for me to sit here and tell you what your values are, because I don't know every one of you individually. And And on the principle that I think Arthur told me that there were 400 people that were here, and some percent, yeah, 420, and some percentage of you are going to find what I'm about to say really offensive, and that's too bad. But let me tell you what I think the shared values of being a deadhead are. I'll tell you a story. 1977, long story short, I had been back east defending my doctoral dissertation about Jack Kerouac. And I got on a plane and I landed. It was like 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night. And I took a bus into downtown San Francisco, and I got to do something I'd always wanted to do. I jumped into a cab, and I said to the cabbie, this is December something, 1977, and I said to the cabbie, "Winterland and step on it." And he got me there fast, and I dropped on the plane. So I was feeling no pain, and I was sort of dancing the length of Winterland toward the stage. And I got about halfway there, and somebody unintentionally bumped into me, and my glasses fell off. Well, I'm a little panicked, feeling around on the ground, worried that somebody, of course, is going to move their feet and crunch. Time to go home. And everybody around me, at least a couple of the people around me, sensed, just intuitively sensed my anxiety and reached down and found my glasses for me. And I thought, this is a community. This is the principle of, unless you're actually standing on my head, you can do anything you want, and we're in this together. Susanna said, that she'd understood being in it together when you're a Niner fan and, everybody on your side of the stadium is with you. But it's really cool when everybody in the room is with you, like at a Dead concert. So what I realized in that moment when they found my glasses and they stuck them on my face and I went, thanks, and went on up to the front of the stage, is basically kind of Buddhist, which is to say that we're all one. Now, not to overgeneralize, but the only cosmic message I ever got out of acid was that it is all one. Everything. The planet, the animals, the people. Most people that I know seem to agree with that. Which suggests at the root of being a deadhead is that we be inclusive and that we be good to each other and that we relate to everybody else as being some other aspect of our own self. Which makes white nationalism completely impossible and bullshit. And completely intolerable because you simply cannot differentiate people that way. So I want to talk about the values that I identified that came out of the so-called Summer of Love in San Francisco in the Hague. And keeping in mind that for a lot of reasons, not least of which was they were the best musicians, they weren't the best songwriters. Nobody wrote White Rabbit and the Grateful Dead. But they were the best musicians, and they stayed together the longest for lots of different reasons. And they inherited the values of the Haight-Ashbury, which is to say, we inherited the values of the Haight-Ashbury. So, what are those values? Well, the first is the anti-Trump value, which is to say, anti-materialism. The idea that, and this is not necessarily austerity or deprivation or poverty, voluntary poverty. Although, I know monks who accept that, and I honor it. But it's also about what the Buddhists would call non-attachment. Jerry, did not object to the money that came flowing toward him as long as he didn't keep it. He died waiting for his next paycheck. As long as you didn't get hung up on it, as long as you didn't attach yourself to it, then it just flowed, and it was what it was. But he wasn't a miser. And he dedicated his life to the principle that making art and making love, in the broadest of senses, was more important than making money and making a big bank account. I got to tell you, the only large amount of money he left behind when he died was he got a large advance for the art book Harrington Street, and Sue Stevens, his assistant, and his lawyer went to him and said, "Okay, you're getting a large check for this. We're not showing you the amount. Sign this." And he went, "Okay." He said, "You're never going to see this again. We're going to put this in an account, and your children are going to get it when you're gone. And don't ask." And he agreed. And they did get it. And that was what he left behind. In addition to anti-materialism, there's anti-racism. If there's one lesson from LSD, it's that we're all one. And you just can't make generalizations about race and violate that law. It's insane. A third point about what happened in the hate is that nature is not something over there. We're people. We are created in God's image. Therefore, this planet is ours to use. Mine. Well, that's patently bullshit. We're part of this network, clearly, and we have to be respectful of it and stewards of it. And if what's going on the planet right now isn't enough to convince you, I don't know what more it's going to take to convince you, except that within a year, there's going to be chunks of the planet that are uninhabitable because of what we're doing to it. So that's part of the same lesson. That's the difference of the 50 years, okay? This lesson was clear 50 years ago, but the objects, and the grimmest stuff wasn't so obvious. But a chunk of ice the size of Delaware just left Antarctica. It's not a good sign. A couple of other points. One is that there's a whole lot of interesting things that go on in Asian thought and spirituality, like yoga, which of course Weir is a serious follower, or Zen, or any of that, all of which point toward, again, a respect for the planet and a respect for the individual, and this notion that we're really all one. And finally, and really in a weird way, which you may not have thought of, the thing that happened in the 60s that has had the most amazing impact, is the challenge to gender. Now you go, what challenge to gender? The first principle of being a hippie was the whole principle of the gentle hippie, right? Nonviolent, mild, flower child. Well, the flower child part was, the media bullshit, and we can dismiss that. But the gentleness was real. And that gentleness started a domino chain of challenges to American mainstream thinking that started with, first, what is it to be a man? We're not all fucking interior linemen on NFL teams, okay? We're human. And if you start challenging what's supposed to be a macho man, after a while, you get to feminism, and then you get to gay rights, and in the year 2017, you get to the understanding that gender identity isn't about your genitals, it's about your brain. And it's a little more complex than anybody ever thought when I was growing up. And that's more food for thought. But it's all about mutual respect. Now, there's 100 other things, but that'll do for, a set of highlights. And I'd like to point out the obvious, which is that everything I've just listed is exactly what is not true of the current occupant of the White House. Now, there's a number of things here that are a little risky to bring up. One of which is that politics in general, which Jerry always objected to. I'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about dead cover bands. When I first started hearing them, I was like, the band would go, well, gee, man, that's sort of flattering and nice, and we like it. But on the other hand, everybody should do their own music, and And I sort of went along with that because I didn't pay much attention. And then I was in this podcast recently with David Gans, and we were talking about Jerry Day, which is this very sweet annual event. It's my other favorite Deadhead event, along with this one, in which and David was going on about how dead music is this common language amongst musicians all over. And it gives everyone a common ground, a common language to speak with. And I was sort of, I don't know, the way he put it struck me. Because what that language does, let me interrupt myself. I do this very well. I said this yesterday, but let me repeat it. When dipstick reporters would ask me, okay, I got 3 minutes to deadline, I got a file copy, give me the answers now. What is it about the Grateful Dead? And I'd say, okay, it's two things. They created this unique brand of music which involves improvisation, which invokes magic, and sometimes it's magical. And it's not for everybody, but it's for us. And it creates community. And this common language brings us together as a community. And that includes everybody who gets the language, including, most wonderfully, and my heart is opening more and more to them as I experience it, people who are in 2017, 18 years old, which means they were born 5 years after Jerry died, and they're just as good deadheads as any of the rest of us. They get it. And that's making more and more sense to me. And the second flash I had, in addition to what David said, was that Susanna and I went to Red Rocks 2 weeks ago? I don't know. To be part of what was officially called the 75th birthday party. What would have happened? It's a little hard for me to process the idea of Jerry at 75. I'm now 13 years older than when he was died, and the idea that he was only 54 or 53 when he died is like, and I saw all these people and all this music, and I realized we live in times of complete madness. Most of you not all of you, most of you, I think, are going to go, oh, yeah, yes, I do have an MSNBC addiction. It's my problem. I may never kick it. And we live in insane political times in which the President of the United States defends Nazis. I have a problem with that. But I don't have a problem with that. We need more of that. We live in these strange times. And in fact, it has occurred to me over the last months that to be a deadhead is to be part of the resistance. To be part of standing up for values that, they don't have to be all that flamboyant, and they don't have to be all that serious in the, that grim black clothing. Well, I got black pants on, sorry. But anyway, that over-serious resistance thing. They have to be about why we became deadheads in the first place. Why Jerry put up with it in the first place. Now, Jerry always said that the whole point of being the Grateful Dead was that it had nothing to do with politics, which was true until 1988 when he made a single great exception, and that was for the Rainforest Action Network, and his rap was, well, yeah, that's okay because it's for the survival of the planet. And I'm here to say that our being deadheads now is for the survival of America as a beacon of something good in this world. And when you go to being a deadhead, that's why. And that's why we're all in this together. And to quote a song that I was hearing earlier from Senor that Jerry used to sing, it's not a dream anymore. This is the real thing. Hold on to it. Cherish it. Use it. Being a deadhead is like an enlightened choice. And I urge you to keep that in mind. Thank you.
That was amazing. It's very special for us to have Dennis and Susanna and Rosie. And Dennis always brings his deep spirit to our gathering. It means a whole lot to us as a band, and I know as the family, to have these folks here. And